Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the sandals of a long-forgotten emperor who, believe it or not, had an unusual passion: dancing. Yes, you heard that right. Imagine ruling an empire as vast and powerful as Rome, and then deciding that your favorite way to unwind, inspire your subjects, or possibly even assert your authority was through the art of dance. It's a little unexpected, right? You probably won't survive a day in his shoes, though, unless you've mastered the subtle art of public performance with some flair, of course. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm curious where you're tuning in from, whether it's the heart of Rome or the quietest corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story begins with a rather extraordinary Roman emperor, one who is often remembered for his eccentricities rather than his political achievements. His name was Emperor Elagabalus, and his reign, which lasted from 218 to 222 AD, was marked by countless scandals and oddities. Historians still argue whether his eccentric behavior was part of a carefully calculated political strategy, or simply a sign of someone overwhelmed by the pressures of ruling an empire. Either way, Elagabalus wasn't your typical Roman emperor. While most of his contemporaries were busy leading military campaigns or hosting lavish banquets, he was known for something a little less traditional. Among his many peculiar hobbies, dancing was one of his most prominent. But this wasn't the kind of dance you'd expect from a Roman emperor. His passion for movement wasn't just about entertaining the masses or hosting courtly celebrations. It went much deeper. Elagabalus loved to perform in front of his subjects, showcasing intricate dances that left people bewildered. These dances were not just for entertainment, they were symbolic gestures, performances that served as a form of self-expression, a tool to assert his power and mystique. Historians often mention Elagabalus in passing when discussing the more controversial figures of Roman history. But what is rarely discussed is how his love of dance could have shaped the perception of power and control in such a vast empire. Roman emperors were expected to be strong, militaristic, and dignified. Dance, with its fluid movements and grace, didn't quite fit the traditional mold of power. But Elagabalus didn't mind. He wasn't just content with ruling in the typical manner. He wanted to command attention, not just from the people, but from the very gods themselves. And for him, dance was the perfect medium. In the public eye, he may have appeared as nothing more than a young emperor indulging in foolish whims, but his commitment to dancing sent a subtle message to those around him. He was different, and perhaps, by embracing such an unexpected passion, he was carving out a unique space for himself in the political landscape of Rome. It's easy to see why this would be perceived as bizarre. His choice of dance wasn't just an ordinary hobby, it was a bold statement, a visual representation of his unique leadership style. Whether you loved or hated him, you couldn't deny that he was captivating in his own way. And despite the controversy, Elagabalus' performances were undeniably mesmerizing. There's something strangely hypnotic about a ruler so unashamedly expressing themselves in front of their people. It's almost as if, through every step and every twirl, he was declaring his right to rule in his own way, outside the norms. But let's pause here for a moment. Historians still debate whether Elagabalus' dance obsession was truly about power, or if it was just a form of personal expression gone too far. After all, some have suggested that his reign was doomed from the start, with his eccentric behavior leading to the alienation of both his senate and his military. Was his love of dance a symptom of a larger problem, or just another part of his eccentric character? As you drift deeper into this strange, fascinating world, keep that question in mind. There's more to explore about this emperor and his wild, waltzing ways as you sink into the narrative. Imagine the vast marble halls of the Roman Empire, the scent of freshly baked bread mingling with the faint hint of perfume, and the soft murmur of the court in the background. In this setting, Elagabalus' reign wasn't just a political statement, it was an immersion into a world where every gesture, even a dance,
had a meaning.
It wasn't about the typical pomp and circumstance you might expect from the emperor of one of the most powerful empires in the world.
Instead, he used his eccentricities to craft an entirely new image of Roman leadership.
Elagabalus wasn't your usual leader. While his predecessors were focused on military conquests and maintaining power through traditional means, this emperor preferred a more indulgent approach. Historians still argue whether this approach was a deliberate political strategy to gain the loyalty of his subjects, or whether he was simply a man of excess and self-indulgence. His court, unlike many others, was a cacophony of over-the-top celebrations, eccentricities, and lavish events, with dance being one of his favorite forms of expression. And let's be clear, this wasn't just any kind of dance. Elagabalus wasn't twirling in a ballroom or performing simple folk dances. No, he was fascinated by the more dramatic, expressive styles, those that involved intense, sometimes frenzied movements. His performances were elaborate and theatrical, incorporating costumes, music, and lighting to create an almost otherworldly atmosphere. Picture it, the emperor, draped in opulent fabrics, moving to the rhythm of the drums, his body swaying and spinning in ways that made both his courtiers and his enemies pause in wonder.
It was a spectacle unlike anything Rome had ever seen.
This was his way of saying, "Look at me, I am the emperor, and I will express myself however I choose." Dance became his declaration, his signature.
But was it truly an act of rebellion? Or was he simply trying to escape the weight of an empire's expectations? Historians are divided on this point.
Some believe that Elagabalus' dance performances were a means to distract the public from his more controversial policies, while others see it as a genuine personal passion that he couldn't suppress. Regardless of the motivations behind it, his dance routines quickly became legendary, transcending the boundaries of simple court entertainment. They were acts of power, of performance art, that had a profound impact on the people who witnessed them.
And the emperor, who, by all accounts, was youthful and charismatic, managed to captivate the hearts and minds of those who saw him perform.
For some, it was the mark of an eccentric ruler who had no respect for tradition.
For others, it was a sign of a more progressive reign, one that celebrated individuality and personal expression.
However, not everyone was impressed by Elagabalus' performances. As with any ruler who dares to break the mold, there were plenty of critics.
Among the most vocal were the senators, who were accustomed to seeing emperors as strong, stoic leaders who controlled the empire with an iron fist.
To them, the idea of their emperor prancing around in the name of art was simply too much. Elagabalus' love of dancing didn't fit their expectations, and it certainly didn't align with their vision of Roman masculinity. In their eyes, it was a sign of weakness, something to be ridiculed, not celebrated. Historians still argue whether the emperor's dance obsession was a sign of his strength or his downfall.
Was it a reflection of his desire to be seen as something more than just a ruler, someone who could transcend the usual trappings of power? Or was it simply an example of an emperor losing control of his reign, becoming consumed by his own personal whims?
Some scholars suggest that his dance performances were more than just entertainment. They were calculated performances meant to manipulate the Roman people and distract them from his controversial decisions. Elagabalus was also known for his extravagant tastes in clothing, jewelry, and food. His court was a place of constant celebration, with feasts, games, and entertainments taking place almost daily. One can almost picture him now clad in gold, surrounded by servants and musicians, spinning around the room in a whirlwind of color and sound. And yet, while the emperor reveled in his own indulgence, he also demanded the same from those around him.
His love for the dramatic was not confined to his personal life. It bled into every aspect of his rule.
But as with most lavish displays of power, there was a darker side to Elagabalus' reign.
Behind the performances and the celebrations, there were political tensions that simmered beneath the surface. His love for extravagance, dance included, alienated many powerful Romans, including his own family members.
Some historians suggest that this extravagant lifestyle may have contributed to his downfall.
with the emperor's reckless disregard for tradition and decorum leading to his eventual assassination.
Now, picture this, the great Roman Empire, stretching from the misty hills of Britannia to the golden sands of Egypt, with its streets teeming with life, bustling markets, and chariots racing by. Yet, in this vast empire, amidst the military conquests and grand triumphs, one emperor stood out not for his strategic genius, but for his penchant for something as delicate as dance. To many, it was a strange hobby, a diversion that defied the expectations placed upon the ruler of such a mighty civilization. Yet, Elagabalus' obsession with dancing wasn't simply a whim, it was deeply embedded in his reign, in the way he projected his power, and in the way he controlled the image of himself he wished to portray. Let's dig a little deeper into the heart of the emperor's dance obsession. Elagabalus wasn't merely indulging in private performances, he took his passion to the public stage. He would often perform his dances at lavish banquets, where he would dance in front of the Roman elite. These were not quick, spontaneous movements, but full-blown orchestrated spectacles. Some accounts suggest that he would even use elaborate props, ornate robes, and costumes to enhance the visual impact.
Imagine it now, the emperor, a swirling figure of color, moving with surprising grace and fluidity for a man of his stature, captivating the entire room with every step. These performances were not just about self-expression either.
Elagabalus used dance as a form of political communication. Think about the impact it would have had on his subjects. The emperor, who held ultimate power, showing a side of himself that was both graceful and, at times, almost otherworldly. Historians still debate whether this was a form of manipulation, an effort to create an image of a ruler who was not just a political figure, but also an artistic and spiritual leader.
Was Elagabalus seeking to connect with the divine through these performances, or was he simply indulging in his personal pleasures? It's one of those enduring mysteries that keeps scholars talking in hushed tones. There's also the fascinating question of why Elagabalus chose to dance in the first place. It's well known that Roman emperors had many ways of showing their power through military victories, by receiving elaborate titles, and through vast public works. But Elagabalus didn't need to prove his might in the traditional ways. He was an emperor born from the East, and his perspective on leadership was a bit different from the traditional Roman view. His passion for dance may have come from his desire to incorporate more exotic customs into his reign customs from his homeland, in what is now Syria, where dance played a significant role in religious and cultural life.
The movements he performed were rooted in ancient rituals, ones that linked him to the gods in ways that Roman tradition simply didn't. It's clear that Elagabalus saw himself not only as a political leader, but also as a kind of divine intermediary between the gods and the people.
His love of dance, combined with his role as a high priest of the sun god Elgabal, from whom he took his name, made for an intriguing mix of religious fervor and royal duty.
Could it be that the emperor was hoping his dances would somehow channel the divine into the empire?
Was he trying to tell the people that he was not just their ruler, but also their spiritual guide, one who could literally move in rhythm with the cosmos?
But here's where things get even more complicated. Elagabalus was not the only emperor to engage in unusual religious practices. The emperors of Rome often saw themselves as gods, or at least divine agents, but none were quite as flamboyant in their religious displays as Elagabalus.
In fact, one of his most infamous acts was to bring a foreign deity Elgabal into the heart of Rome, forcing the Senate and the people to worship the god.
Historians still argue whether this was a bold, progressive step or a sign of an emperor who was more interested in his personal spiritual experiences than in the well-being of his empire.
One thing is for sure, Elagabalus didn't care what anyone thought.
His worship of Elgabal and his dances in honor of the deity were just a small part of his grand, extravagant scheme to redefine the role of an emperor. And that's where the politics of it all begin to blur with the spectacle. Elagabalus wasn't merely a ruler who entertained his people, he was manipulating the very symbols of power. Imagine walking into the grand hall, expecting the usual formalities of imperial rule, only to find the emperor, dressed in flowing robes, spinning and twirling to the music as if he were a priest of some forgotten ritual.
For some, this was a moment of awe. For others, it was a scandal. Shocking reminder that the emperor wasn't just a leader, he was an entertainer, a performer. His dances weren't just for amusement.
They were political statements wrapped in the elegance of choreography.
It was as if every step he took was another line in his manifesto. Each twirl another defiant declaration that he would not conform to the expectations of those around him. Despite the extravagance, Elagabalus was not entirely unopposed.
While many were captivated by his performances, others began to see them as the symptom of a ruler who had lost his way. The empire, after all, was built on a solid foundation of military might, discipline, and order. Was it possible for an emperor who spent so much time dancing to maintain the same level of respect as those who focused on the empire's military and political prowess?
It was a question that began to eat away at Elagabalus' reign.
As his dances became more extravagant and his rule more unstable, some began to question whether the emperor's obsession with spectacle and self-expression was a sign of genius or a sign of impending doom. Imagine the scene: the grand halls of Rome, the echo of feet on stone floors, the sound of music filling the air. The emperor, not content to sit idly upon a throne, rises and begins to dance.
His movements are fluid, yet dramatic, punctuated by the occasional flourish of his ornate robes. Those in the court who once adored his eccentricities are beginning to murmur behind their hands, wondering if his passion for the performance is a sign of genius or a deeper unraveling of his mind.
And yet, as the emperor twirls before them, his confidence unshaken, it's clear he doesn't care what they think. This is his world, his empire, and he will rule it in whatever manner he sees fit.
But as much as he revelled in the attention, Elagabalus' obsession with dance wasn't merely about self-expression. It was a carefully crafted spectacle designed to manipulate those around him.
Roman emperors knew the importance of appearance, and for Elagabalus, dance was a form of self-promotion.
He wasn't just performing for his court, he was performing for the entire empire.
When an emperor chooses to dance in front of his subjects, it's not just entertainment.
It's a show of power, an assertion that he can control not just armies, but also the hearts and minds of the people.
It's important to recognize the broader context of his reign. Elagabalus was a ruler who, despite his youth and eccentricities, held the immense responsibility of leading an empire that spanned much of Europe, the Middle East, and parts of North Africa.
With such an enormous realm under his control, there were expectations that he would rule with strength and vision.
But instead of following the well-worn path of military campaigns and political alliances, Elagabalus chose to redefine what it meant to be an emperor.
His decision to incorporate dance into his reign was an act of rebellion against tradition. It was a way for him to say, "I do not need the conventional methods of power.
I will use my own voice, my own movements to rule." Of course, not everyone appreciated his creative take on leadership. The Roman elite, many of whom had grown up with the idea of a stoic warrior emperor, were confused, if not downright offended, by his performances. Some felt that by dancing, Elagabalus was diminishing the dignity of the throne. For them, a ruler's worth was measured by military conquest and political maneuvering, not by the ability to perform an elegant waltz or spin in a circle. The emperor's actions were perceived as childish, frivolous, and utterly incompatible with the weight of imperial power.
And yet, despite their disapproval, Elagabalus continued to dance.
It wasn't just a hobby, it was part of his larger vision for himself and the empire. He viewed himself not merely as a political figure, but as an artist, a performer, and even a divine figure.
His dances were a form of religious expression as much as they were political theatre. As high priest of the sun god Elgabal, he had a spiritual role to fulfill, one that required public displays of devotion. And what better way to honor the gods than through the medium of dance, which was both an act of personal devotion and an offering to the divine.
The emperor's performances were also a method of connecting with the people in a way no other ruler had attempted before. While previous emperors may have communicated with their subjects through speeches, military victories, or monumental architecture, Elagabalus chose to speak through his movements.
His dances became a kind of language, one that transcended words. It was an intimate form of communication, one that made the people feel as though they were part of something larger than themselves. To watch Elagabalus dance was to witness the emperor's spirit laid bare.
And to participate in his performances, whether as an observer or a fellow dancer, was to engage in a shared moment of divine and royal expression. Historians, however, still debate the true significance of Elagabalus' public performances. Was he simply trying to establish a new identity for himself, one that was uniquely his?
Or was he attempting to foster a deeper connection with the Roman people, using his dances to create a kind of religious and cultural unity?
Some scholars argue that his performances were nothing more than self-indulgent distractions, meant to distract from his political ineptitude. They claim that Elagabalus used his dances to divert attention from his increasingly erratic decisions, hoping to keep the people entertained while he continued to make controversial choices. Others, however, see the dances as a reflection of a deeper, more profound vision of leadership.
In this view, Elagabalus wasn't just playing the fool, he was a visionary, someone who recognized that the power of an emperor didn't only lie in military strength or political alliances.
The true power of a ruler, they argue, is in their ability to inspire, to captivate, and to connect with the people on an emotional and spiritual level.
Through his dances, Elagabalus might have been attempting to transcend the limitations of traditional Roman leadership, seeking a higher form of rule that was based on art, expression, and divine connection. Regardless of the interpretation, one thing is clear: Elagabalus was a ruler who dared to break the mold. Whether his dance performances were an act of rebellion, a form of self-expression, or a calculated political strategy, they were undeniably a central part of his reign.
And as the emperor spun and twirled in the great halls of Rome, he wasn't just entertaining, he was redefining what it meant to be an emperor in the ancient world.
But as with all spectacles, the thrill of the performance eventually fades.
The question remains, could Elagabalus' unique approach to ruling have helped him secure his place in history as a great emperor? Or was it simply a footnote in the tumultuous history of Rome?
As you continue to drift deeper into the story, imagine once again those grand Roman feasts, the heat of the torches lighting up the emperor's pale face, his eyes glimmering with a hint of mischief as the drums begin to play.
The courtiers, already well accustomed to his eccentricities, sit back in their seats, wondering just how much further Elagabalus will go this time.
Perhaps a few of them exchange nervous glances, already knowing that the performance will not be like any other.
And yet, despite their reservations, they remain mesmerized by the sight before them. The emperor, moving in ways that seem to defy the very essence of what it means to be an emperor, let alone a Roman one. But what does it mean to lead an empire while balancing on the fine line between grandeur and absurdity? Elagabalus didn't seem to have an answer.
He reveled in his defiance of tradition. But as his reign continued, the consequences of his actions started to mount.
While his performances and extravagant displays captured the imaginations of many, they also alienated key factions within the empire. The Roman elite, especially those in the Senate, began to view him not as a ruler, but as a spoiled child playing dress-up. To them, his dances were a sign of weakness, not power. His unwillingness to follow Roman norms, his unpredictable behavior, and his flirtations with foreign deities made them uneasy.
For them, an emperor who danced was an emperor who had lost control of his empire.
Historians often note the emperor's curious relationship with the Roman military.
He wasn't particularly concerned with military conquests or expanding the empire, unlike many of his predecessors. In fact, some sources suggest that he found the military life dull and preferred the glamour and theatrics of his court.
The military, on the other hand, saw this as a grave failure of leadership. Emperors were expected to command legions, to lead battles, and to uphold the honor of the Roman state. To them, Elagabalus' passion for dance was a distraction from these vital duties, but for Elagabalus, his performances were not just an escape from the pressures of leadership. They were a means of asserting his power in a different way. Dance was his weapon, a form of cultural and political influence. The emperor believed that he could command loyalty through art, that he could connect with his people through rhythm and movement, rather than speeches or military campaigns.
But as much as he tried to redefine the role of the emperor, he was still trapped by the expectations of the Roman system.
His approach was too unconventional, too alien for many Romans to fully accept.
And slowly, the cracks in his reign began to show.
One of the most enduring critiques of Elagabalus' rule is the notion that he didn't fully understand the intricacies of Roman politics.
The empire was not just a playground for emperors to experiment with their whims and desires.
It was a machine, one that needed careful management.
And as much as Elagabalus sought to change the political landscape, he failed to recognize that leadership wasn't just about making a spectacle, it was also about maintaining control over a vast, complex society.
To some, his passion for dance was simply a reflection of his broader failure to truly govern. Still, despite the criticisms, there was a part of Elagabalus' reign that can't be denied. He was, in his own way, captivating.
His dances may have been seen as foolish by some, but they captured the spirit of an emperor who refused to be confined by tradition. He was a man who rejected the usual trappings of power and sought to create something uniquely his own.
And while his reign may have been short and ultimately ended in tragedy, his influence on Roman culture and on the concept of leadership left an indelible mark.
As the emperor's reign wore on, those who had once celebrated his unique approach to power began to question whether the performance was worth the price. Could an emperor who spent so much time dancing really keep control of the empire? Historians still argue about the reasons for his eventual downfall. Was it the dance, the public spectacles, the foreign religion, or something else entirely? It's likely that it was a combination of factors that led to his assassination.
The Senate, the military, and the people of Rome had grown increasingly disillusioned with his antics, and when the time came for a change, they acted decisively.
As the years passed and Elagabalus was removed from power, his reign faded into the annals of history.
Yet, despite the scandal, despite the criticism, his story remains one of the most fascinating in the long list of Roman emperors.
It's a story that challenges our traditional notions of power, showing us that sometimes leadership isn't about strength or military might.
Sometimes it's about making a spectacle of yourself, living outside the lines, and daring to do things differently. Historians still argue about the ultimate meaning of Elagabalus' reign. Was he simply an emperor who didn't understand his role, or was he a revolutionary, someone who sought to redefine what it meant to rule an empire?
Perhaps the answer lies somewhere in between.
His reign may have been brief, but in its own way, it was a moment of boldness, a glimpse into the life of an emperor who wasn't afraid to dance to his own tune, even if that tune ultimately led him to ruin. Now, imagine the quiet moments that came after the music stopped, the last echo of the emperor's feet tapping on the stone floor fading into the silence of the imperial halls. Elagabalus may have been a spectacle to the people of Rome, but behind the grandeur, there were whispers from those who had seen enough of his peculiarities. The Senate, the military, and even his closest advisors began to view him as a leader whose priorities were out of touch with the needs of the empire.
The once celebrated performer, who had captured the attention of the public with his dances, became a figure of ridicule, a symbol of excess and instability.
Despite the emperor's flair for the dramatic, there was a creeping unease among his advisors. In the minds of many powerful Romans, Elagabalus' reign was a sign that the empire had lost its way. Gone were the days of strong military leadership and disciplined governance. Instead, Rome had an emperor who spent his time twirling around in his ornate robes, focusing on the beauty of movement rather than the strength of his empire. His reign was characterized by indulgence, eccentricity, and a devotion to personal expression that alienated many who still clung to the old Roman ideals of power and strength. It was this disconnection from the practicalities of ruling an empire that led to growing discontent. Historians often point to the deteriorating relationship between Elagabalus and the Roman military as a key factor in his downfall. The emperor's lack of interest in military affairs, combined with his flamboyant, extravagant behavior, was seen as a serious weakness.
Roman emperors were expected to lead their legions into battle, defend the borders, and ensure the security of the empire.
Elagabalus, however, was more concerned with the performance of his rituals and the opulence of his court than with the practicalities of war. The military, which had long been the backbone of Roman power, began to lose faith in their emperor.
And let's not forget the religious aspect of Elagabalus' reign.
His insistence on introducing his eastern god, the Elgabal, into the heart of Roman religion was another major point of contention.
In a city that had long been defined by its pantheon of gods and traditions, the emperor's insistence on elevating this foreign deity was viewed as an affront to Roman values. His dances, which had once seemed like a powerful and personal form of expression, began to take on a darker tone.
To many Romans,
they were no longer the creative displays of an eccentric ruler. They were seen as an imposition of foreign beliefs and a challenge to Rome's religious customs.
Historians still debate how much of a role religion played in Elagabalus' downfall.
Some argued that his religious zealotry was the final straw that broke the camel's back, while others believe it was merely one of many factors that led to his fall from grace. Regardless of the cause, one thing is clear. Elagabalus was an emperor who refused to conform to the expectations of his people, and that refusal ultimately led to his undoing.
When a ruler alienates both the military and the religious establishment, it's only a matter of time before his reign begins to crumble.
By the time of his assassination in 22 AD, Elagabalus had become a figure of contempt.
His extravagant lifestyle, his obsession with dance, and his religious experiments had made him a symbol of everything that was wrong with Rome. The people, once entranced by his performances, had turned on him, and those who had once been his most loyal supporters now sought his removal. The very same senators and military leaders who had once tolerated his eccentricities now saw him as a liability, someone who had undermined the very foundations of Roman power. The emperor's death marked the end of a brief and tumultuous reign. Elagabalus was assassinated by members of the Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers who were supposed to protect him.
It was a brutal end to a reign that had been marked by excess and indulgence. But despite the way it ended, his story continued to capture the imagination of historians and the public alike.
The curious case of Elagabalus, the emperor who loved to dance.
The emperor who refused to conform became one of the most fascinating tales in the history of Rome.
Historians still debate whether Elagabalus was a tragic figure, a ruler who was ahead of his time, but ultimately doomed by his own excesses, or whether he was simply an emperor who didn't understand the responsibilities of his position.
His reign has been the subject of much scholarly discussion, and his legacy continues to be one of contradiction. On one hand, he was a ruler who sought to change the very nature of Roman leadership, pushing the boundaries of what it meant to be emperor.
On the other hand, his refusal to adapt to the practical realities of ruling an empire led to his downfall.
Perhaps the most enduring aspect of Elagabalus' reign is the way it challenges our traditional understanding of power.
He didn't conquer lands or lead armies, yet his performances were a form of conquest all their own.
His dances were a way of capturing the attention of his people, of asserting his authority in a way that was unique and unforgettable.
Whether his performances were an act of genius or self-indulgence remains a question that historians continue to grapple with.
But one thing is certain, Elagabalus left a lasting impression on the history of Rome, not as a military hero or a political mastermind, but as an emperor who sought to rule through art, performance, and personal expression. As we continue this journey into the peculiar reign of Elagabalus, imagine yourself seated at the edge of the grand imperial banquet hall, with flickering torchlight casting long shadows across the stone floor.
There are smells of rich spices and sweet wine, but it's the spectacle of the evening that holds your attention.
Elagabalus, the Emperor of Rome, stands in the center of it all, draped in fine silk, his movements flowing like water as the music swells.
The court watches him in silent awe, or at least, that's the image he hoped to project. But beneath the surface, things were far from calm.
In a way, Elagabalus' reign became a performance, a very public act, playing out for the elite of Rome, but with an audience growing increasingly uncomfortable with the script.
At the heart of his courtly performances, Elagabalus wasn't just entertaining for the sake of it. He was building a brand of leadership that was uniquely his.
His decision to embrace theatricality wasn't just about personal indulgence.
It was an attempt to craft an identity that was larger than life, a persona that would be remembered for generations. And in a way, he succeeded.
Though his reign was short, the emperor's eccentricities would outlast him, becoming the stuff of legend. But at what cost? As his fame grew, so too did his discontent among the more traditional elements of Roman society.
Elagabalus wasn't merely a performer in a palace of opulence. He was a political figure.
His reign, much like his dances, was a mix of high art and high stakes. His love for dramatic displays of power alienated key parts of the Roman establishment, especially those who held the military and political power. His disdain for the expectations of military conquest only deepened the rift between him and the Roman legions.
The legions believed that a strong emperor should be an extension of their own values of honor and duty. Despite his clear disconnect with the military, there were those within his inner circle who found his unconventional approach to leadership strangely effective. Elagabalus had an undeniable charm, and for all his absurdities, he knew how to capture the attention of those around him.
His performances, whether they were dances, theatrical rituals, or religious ceremonies, served as a kind of non-verbal communication, a way of speaking to his people without uttering a word. It was as if he had created his own private language, one that transcended politics and military strategy, and spoke directly to the hearts of those who watched him.
But could this form of expression, however captivating, hold up in the cutthroat political world of Rome? The question remains, was Elagabalus' reign a failed experiment in redefining the role of the emperor? Or was it simply a case of a ruler losing his grip on the empire he was meant to govern? Some historians argued that his downfall was inevitable, that no ruler could survive long in Rome without aligning themselves with the military elite and upholding the empire's traditional values.
Others suggest that Elagabalus was ahead of his time, an emperor who sought to bring art, religion, and performance into the fold of imperial leadership. Was his eccentricity a sign of progressive thinking, or was it an expression of hubris? A ruler who believed that his art could shield him from the very forces that had once secured his power.
At the heart of it all, however, was the emperor's self-confidence. Elagabalus believed in his power as a performer and a ruler.
He truly thought that his ability to connect with the people through his dances would elevate him above the realm of traditional Roman rulers. His identity as an emperor was inextricably linked to his performances. He didn't just want to rule the empire.
He wanted to make an impact, to become a living symbol of divine rule and unrestrained expression.
His approach was not just about power for the sake of power. It was about asserting his personal identity as the ultimate authority in Rome, even if that authority was, at times, confusing and chaotic.
As the political tension grew and the whispers of discontent reached a boiling point, Elagabalus' performances took on a darker undertone.
What had once been an act of personal expression, his dances, his rituals now began to symbolize the empire's shifting priorities, its shifting allegiances. To the senators and soldiers, the emperor's moves were not just artistic.
They were a sign of instability, of an emperor more interested in his own pleasure than in maintaining the integrity of Rome. As his critics grew louder, it became evident that Elagabalus' reign, like the dances he performed, was spiraling out of control. The emperor's downfall, when it came, was swift and brutal.
On March 11th to 20 to add, just 4 years after he had ascended to the throne, Elagabalus was assassinated by his own bodyguards.
The Praetorian Guard, who had once been his loyal protectors, turned against him. likely tired of the emperor's erratic rule and his alienation of Rome's traditional power structures. Elagabalus' mother, Julia Soaemias, was also killed in the ensuing chaos. The assassin's blade ended the reign of an emperor who had once been a symbol of flamboyance and innovation, but who had ultimately become a symbol of imperial decay. In the end, Elagabalus' death marked the conclusion of an unusual chapter in Roman history.
His reign, filled with performances and extravagant displays, was ultimately overshadowed by his inability to maintain the stability and loyalty required to rule Rome effectively. Yet, even in death, Elagabalus' story continued to capture the imaginations of future generations. His life serves as a reminder of the dangers of excess, of the fragile balance between art and power, and of the unpredictable nature of the imperial throne.
Though he may not have left behind a lasting empire, Elagabalus certainly left a legacy of performance, spectacle, and defiance that continues to intrigue historians.
Was he a tragic figure, a ruler who sought to reshape Rome through his own unique vision, only to fall victim to his own excesses? Or was he a fool, a man whose vanity and lack of political foresight led to his untimely demise?
Perhaps it's a little of both.
Now, let's slow things down and consider the strange legacy of Elagabalus as he fades from the annals of history.
In the wake of his assassination, the emperor was quickly erased from the records. His name, once so vibrant and daring, was stricken from the official histories. The Senate, eager to distance itself from the embarrassment of his reign, practically wiped out his memory, treating him as a ruler whose very existence had been a stain on Roman tradition.
Yet, despite this intentional erasure, the story of Elagabalus has lived on, passed through the cracks of time, and into the hands of those who study the oddities of ancient rulers. Historians continue to debate the true nature of his reign. Was Elagabalus a victim of his own eccentricities, or did his reign serve as a precursor to a more artistic form of leadership that would emerge centuries later?
What makes his story particularly compelling is that it forces us to reconsider the traditional notion of power and the role that performance, ritual, and even spectacle play in shaping history. Elagabalus wasn't just a ruler, he was an artist, a performer, and perhaps even a prophet of sorts, whose vision of leadership was more akin to that of a modern-day celebrity than the stoic figure of authority we might expect in ancient Rome. Some scholars have suggested that Elagabalus' obsession with dance was a way for him to feel a sense of control over a world that was constantly slipping away from him. In his dances, he became untouchable, an emperor who didn't need to wield a sword or command an army to assert his authority.
His movements, graceful and defiant, were his own form of power. It's as if he was saying, "Look at me, I am the emperor, and I don't need your traditional forms of strength.
I will rule through beauty, through rhythm, through art, in a world that expected its rulers to be warriors and statesmen." Elagabalus redefined what it meant to lead. However, there's an undeniable fragility to his reign.
As we've seen, his performances, initially seen as artistic triumphs, quickly became emblematic of everything that was wrong with his rule. His lavish lifestyle, his reliance on spectacle rather than substance, and his alienation of the military all contributed to the unraveling of his power.
For all his talent as a performer, Elagabalus lacked the political acumen that was required to hold the fragile Roman Empire together.
His dances, once so enchanting, became symbols of his inability to balance the demands of leadership with the realities of governing an empire.
What does Elagabalus' reign tell us about the nature of power? It suggests that leadership isn't always about military might or political savvy. Sometimes it's about the image you project, the identity you create for yourself. Elagabalus used dance not just to entertain, but to forge his own image of power, an image that ultimately didn't align with the expectations of Roman society.
His reign, as flamboyant as it was, serves as a cautionary tale of what happens when a ruler becomes too disconnected from the practical realities of leadership.
In the end, Elagabalus' story reminds us of the importance of balance in power. It's not enough to simply be charismatic or performative. A ruler must be able to command loyalty, to inspire respect, and to navigate the complex political landscape. Elagabalus' failure to do this sealed his fate.
But perhaps, just perhaps, there is a lesson to be learned from the way he tried to shape his own destiny through art and performance. For in his attempts to transcend the conventional expectations of emperors, he may have inadvertently pointed the way toward a new kind of leadership, one where personal expression and public image could play a role in governance. It's also worth noting that, despite his fall from grace, Elagabalus' passion for the arts did not vanish with his death. In many ways, he became an icon of rebellion, a figure who defied the traditional norms of his time and sought to carve out a new space for personal expression. His story would be remembered not just for the mistakes he made, but for the way he challenged the very concept of imperial authority. While his reign was ultimately short-lived, his legacy, though controversial, sparked a conversation about the intersection of power and performance that continues to this day.
In modern times, we might look at Elagabalus not as a tragic failure, but as a ruler who dared to dream in a world that wasn't ready to see his vision come to life.
His dances, though seen by some as foolish, were an expression of individuality, a desire to break free from the traditional molds of leadership.
In his time, such an approach was doomed to failure, but perhaps his story reminds us that the world often needs a few visionaries willing to push the boundaries of what is possible. If nothing else, Elagabalus showed us that sometimes the most enduring legacies are the ones that don't fit neatly into the boxes of tradition.
As you think about Elagabalus and his reign, it's impossible not to feel a bit of sympathy for him.
Here was an emperor who was both a product of his time and a man ahead of it, a ruler who tried to change the course of history, only to be swept aside by the very forces he sought to escape. Perhaps in another time, his artistic approach to leadership would have been celebrated. But in ancient Rome, where power was built on military might and political alliances, Elagabalus' story was always destined to end in tragedy. As we continue our exploration of Elagabalus' reign, let's pause for a moment and reflect on the deeper significance of his rise and fall. His story is not just one of eccentricity or theatricality. It's a story of the fragility of power, of how easily an emperor can be consumed by his own image. Elagabalus, with his colorful robes, his captivating dances, and his divine aspirations, may have been a ruler who genuinely believed in his ability to reshape Roman leadership. But in doing so, he lost sight of the very foundations of what kept the empire running. To truly understand the magnitude of Elagabalus' mistakes, we need to revisit the core of Roman power, the military.
Rome, after all, was built on the strength of its legions.
The Roman military was the backbone of the empire, the force that had conquered vast territories and established Roman dominance across 3 continents. The emperors, for all their pomp and ceremony, were ultimately held in place by the loyalty of the soldiers who defended the empire.
To alienate the military, as Elagabalus did, was a fatal misstep. In many ways, Elagabalus' inability to connect with the military is the key to understanding his downfall. While he spent his time in the luxury of his court, dancing and performing rituals that made him seem otherworldly, the military was left to wonder whether their emperor even understood the realities of leadership. An emperor who ignored the importance of his legions, who didn't prioritize military success, was an emperor who had failed to understand the core principles of Roman rule.
But Elagabalus' reign was not entirely devoid of merit. In some ways, he did manage to break the mold of Roman leadership, albeit in a way that was not sustainable in the long run. His dances, his performances, his religious ceremonies, all these things were attempts to introduce something new, something personal, into the cold, hard machinery of imperial rule. Whether it was a misguided vision or an act of pure self-expression, he dared to step outside the bounds of tradition in a way that is something we can admire today, even if his approach ultimately led to his undoing. His love for spectacle, however, did more than simply alienate the military. It left the Senate uneasy as well. The Roman Senate, A body steeped in tradition was not accustomed to an emperor who valued art and performance over military prowess and political maneuvering. For them, Elagabalus was an emperor who not only disrespected the values of Roman leadership, but also threatened the very foundation of their political power. They viewed him as a ruler who was out of touch with the responsibilities of governance.
In their eyes, he was more of a performer than a statesman, and they were not prepared to accept such a radical shift in leadership. It's easy to imagine the frustration that must have been felt by those around Elagabalus. Imagine being one of his advisors, charged with helping to navigate the empire's complex political and military challenges, only to have your emperor retreat into his private world of dances and religious rituals. The tension between Elagabalus and his court must have been palpable.
His performances, once seen as charming and unique, became a reminder of his detachment from the real business of ruling. This growing sense of frustration among the elite of Rome ultimately reached a breaking point. As his eccentricities became more pronounced and his political ineptitude more obvious, Elagabalus found himself increasingly isolated. The very same people who had once rallied behind him now saw him as a threat, not just to their own positions, but to the stability of the empire itself. His performance had become a farce, and like all performances, it was destined to end.
Historians still debate the reasons for his assassination. Some argue that his foreign religious practices, his disregard for Roman tradition, and his unpopularity with the military all contributed to the decision to remove him from power. Others point to his inability to secure alliances and his failure to balance his public image with the practical needs of the empire.
In the end, it was a combination of factors that led to Elagabalus' downfall.
But one thing is clear. His reign serves as a powerful lesson in the dangers of losing sight of the practical responsibilities of leadership.
As we reflect on Elagabalus' life, we begin to see that his story is more than just a footnote in the history of Rome. It is a cautionary tale about the limits of personal expression and the price of breaking tradition. Elagabalus was a ruler who, in his attempts to carve out a new space for himself, lost touch with the very things that had once made Rome great.
His legacy is one of defiance, yes, but also a failure to balance his personal ambitions with the needs of the empire.
And yet, there's something undeniably tragic about Elagabalus' reign.
He was a man of vision, someone who sought to redefine the role of the emperor and elevate himself through art and performance.
In another time, perhaps his ideas would have been celebrated,
but in ancient Rome, where tradition and military power were paramount, his reign was always destined to end in disaster.
In the end, Elagabalus' legacy is one of unfulfilled potential, a vision that was too radical for the time in which he lived.
As his story fades into history, we are left with a sense of both admiration and pity for this strange emperor. He dared to dream beyond the confines of Roman tradition, but in doing so, he lost the very power that made him emperor in the first place. His dances, his performances, his divine aspirations, all of them were a part of a grand vision that ultimately collapsed under the weight of Roman expectations.
In the end, Elagabalus is remembered not as a great emperor, but as a tragic figure, a ruler whose ambition was too great for the empire he sought to lead. As we near the final chapters of Elagabalus' strange reign, let's step back and look at the bigger picture.
His time on the throne, though short, is a powerful reminder of the complexities of leadership, how deeply an emperor's personal vision and eccentricities can shape the legacy of an entire empire.
Elagabalus' reign didn't just break with tradition, it bent it, twisted it, and ultimately shattered it. What he tried to create a new vision of imperial leadership that mixed art, religion, and power was simply too much for Rome to accept. In a way, he was a tragic figure, ahead of his time but too radical for his era. His extravagant displays, whether in dance, religious ritual, or his personal behavior, were not just about flaunting his authority, they were attempts to redefine what it meant to rule. Elagabalus was trying to do something no other emperor had done before. He wanted to elevate the emperor not just as a political figure, but as a spiritual and cultural icon. It was a bold, almost visionary idea, but one that did not fit within the rigid confines of Roman society, which valued military might and political stability far above artistic expression or spiritual experiments.
His willingness to engage in the kind of performance art that was his dancing and religious rituals shows how far he was willing to go to craft a new identity for himself.
The emperor didn't just want to be the man who held the empire together, he wanted to be a living symbol, a force that could move through the empire with the same grace he displayed in his dances. But in doing so, he alienated the very institutions that were essential for the functioning of the Roman Empire. The Senate, the military, and even the people who had once supported him began to see him as more of a curiosity, a ruler who had gone too far off the beaten path.
As we think about Elagabalus' reign, it's impossible not to wonder how different things might have been if he had struck a better balance between his personal passions and his duties as emperor.
What if he had been able to incorporate his love of performance and religion into a more stable and sustainable form of leadership?
Could Elagabalus have succeeded if he had made more concessions to the traditional Roman values of military power and political alliances? Perhaps his vision for the empire was too revolutionary for the time in which he lived, or perhaps he was simply unable to manage the immense pressures that came with the throne.
What Elagabalus could not have known was that his reign would be remembered not for his failure to conquer new lands or expand the empire, but for the peculiar way in which he tried to reshape the very idea of what it meant to be an emperor. In doing so, he became a figure that historians still look to with fascination, both for his eccentricities and his boldness.
His story may be a cautionary one, but it is also a testament to the power of individuality and artistic expression, even in the midst of an empire that was built on tradition and military might. But despite his dramatic end, Elagabalus' legacy remains oddly compelling. We may not remember him as a great military leader or a statesman who expanded Rome's borders, but we do remember him as someone who challenged the very foundations of Roman rule. His story asks us to think about the nature of leadership. Is it about military victories and political alliances? Or is it about personal vision, expression, and the ability to captivate those around you?
In the end, Elagabalus serves as a symbol of both the dangers of excess and the allure of nonconformity.
His eccentricity was his downfall, but it was also what made him unforgettable.
His dances, once seen as a sign of decadence, are now remembered as part of the strange, tangled tapestry of Roman history. And in that way, his brief reign becomes a fascinating footnote, a reminder that sometimes even the most unusual rulers leave behind a legacy that endures far longer than their time on the throne. As we reflect on the impact of Elagabalus, it's important to understand that his reign was far from meaningless. Though his rule was marked by excess and folly, it also provided a glimpse into the potential for leadership outside the confines of tradition. Elagabalus was not just a ruler. He was a visionary one who sought to blend politics with art and religion in ways that no Roman emperor had dared before. And though his efforts may have failed, they opened up a conversation about the power of image and performance in leadership, a conversation that continues to this day. The emperor's tragic death marked the end of his unconventional reign, but it also left behind a legacy of questions.
Could a ruler with Elagabalus' passion for self-expression ever have thrived in Rome? Was there a way for him to balance his artistic ambitions with the military and political responsibilities of being emperor? Perhaps we will never know the answers to these questions, but what we do know is that his life challenges the conventional understanding of power and leadership.
As you drift off, let the strange, colourful world of Elagabalus linger in your thoughts, a world where dance and performance were as important as military victories, where an emperor's identity was shaped not just by conquest, but by creativity and vision.
It's a world that seems distant from our own, but one that still resonates in the way we think about leadership, power, and personal expression.
Perhaps, in the end, it's not just the spectacular reigns of great military leaders that shape history, but the eccentric rulers who dare to dream beyond the bounds of tradition. As the silence of Elagabalus' reign settles in, we begin to realize that his time on the throne wasn't just about personal extravagance, it was a symbol of something larger. The story of Elagabalus isn't just the story of an emperor who loved to dance.
It's a story of the limits of tradition, the tension between individuality and power, and the sometimes deadly consequences of pushing too far beyond the bounds of what is accepted.
In the grand sweep of Roman history, where emperors are often remembered for their military conquests and political strategies, Elagabalus stands out as an outlier, a ruler who dared to rewrite the rules in his own image, but whose legacy became a tragic reminder of the costs of defiance.
His death marked the end of a brief but colourful chapter. But even in death, Elagabalus' influence endured.
It's curious how an emperor who left behind no great victories,
no sprawling conquests, and no monumental political reforms could have left such an indelible mark on history.
His reign serves as a paradox: on one hand, a failure, but on the other, a statement about the fragility of power, the influence of spectacle, and the dangers of living in a world of one's own creation.
The impact of Elagabalus' reign wasn't immediately felt by all of Rome, of course. In fact, for many of the common people, the emperor's eccentricities were little more than background noise to the politics of their everyday lives.
But for those at the top of Roman society, the senators, the military leaders, the noble families, Elagabalus' reign was a clear warning. The traditional Roman ideals of masculinity, military prowess, and political calculation couldn't be entirely cast aside. Rome, at its heart, was a city of warriors, and to step too far away from that ethos could bring swift retribution. Elagabalus was a living testament to this harsh reality. A ruler who took artistic freedom and self-expression too far, and in doing so, lost his place in history. But what of the modern world?
It's easy to dismiss Elagabalus as an oddity, a historical footnote whose reign was little more than a curious anomaly in the long line of Roman emperors. Yet, his story offers a surprising amount of relevance for our time.
The emperor's attempt to redefine power through personal performance speaks to a larger conversation about the ways in which leaders today shape their identities. Like Elagabalus, modern politicians and public figures often use their image, their personality, and their ability to captivate an audience as tools for maintaining influence and control. Elagabalus may have been an early precursor to today's celebrity-driven politics, where the line between leadership and spectacle is increasingly blurred. In our own world, where social media can amplify the image of a leader faster than any military victory ever could, Elagabalus' story is more relatable than ever.
He understood the power of spectacle, the way in which public performances can elevate a figure beyond the traditional means of power. Though he did not have the tools of the modern world at his disposal, his vision of leadership as one intertwined with personal expression and public performance mirrors the strategies of today's political figures who rely on image and charisma. Perhaps, then, Elagabalus' reign was not entirely in vain.
His failure to adapt to Roman expectations, to understand the importance of tradition, was a fatal flaw.
But his vision of a ruler as both a political figure and an entertainer, an individual who could blend spectacle with authority, offers an intriguing glimpse into the way leadership might evolve in the future.
After all, what is a modern political figure if not a performer, orchestrating their actions for an audience of millions? Elagabalus may have failed because he didn't understand the nature of his own time, but his story offers us a chance to reflect on the intersection of performance, power, and leadership.
It's a timeless lesson in how the search for personal expression, no matter how grand, must always be balanced by an understanding of the greater structures of society.
Elagabalus tried to break free of these structures, only to find that they were too powerful to escape. In the modern era, we see a world where political leaders increasingly craft their personas in much the same way Elagabalus once crafted his performances. But the story of Elagabalus serves as a cautionary tale, reminding us that while image and spectacle can create power, they are never enough on their own. Leadership must be grounded in a connection to the world beyond one's own image. As the years pass, We can only imagine how Elagabalus would be remembered if he had lived in a different time.
Would he have been seen as a visionary, a man ahead of his time, whose blending of art and politics was a harbinger of the future? Or would he still have been seen as a foolish ruler who got lost in his own performance?
Perhaps a bit of both. For all his flaws, there's something undeniably captivating about Elagabalus, something that reminds us that even in failure, there's room for innovation. And even in tragedy, there's a lesson to be learned. As you reflect on this unusual emperor and his reign, take a moment to think about the nature of power and leadership. What does it mean to lead? What is the balance between the personal and the political? And what happens when a leader pushes the boundaries of tradition too far, only to find that the world around them is not yet ready for their vision? Elagabalus' story, though tragic, offers a glimpse into these questions, a glimpse that still resonates today.
As we near the end of Elagabalus' story, it's important to reflect on what his reign truly teaches us.
The emperor's brief time on the throne, marked by extravagant displays and dramatic performances, seems far removed from the historical image of Roman emperors. Yet, within the narrative of his rise and fall lies a timeless tale about the complexities of leadership, power, and personal expression.
Though his reign was filled with scandal and controversy, Elagabalus' life serves as a mirror to the delicate balance that all rulers must maintain between the personal and the political.
In examining Elagabalus' reign, we also have to consider the role of image in shaping a ruler's legacy. In today's world, political figures are often scrutinized for the way they craft their public personas, whether it's through speeches, social media, or stage public events. Elagabalus, in his time, used the theatre of his court to create an image of himself that was as much about performance as it was about power.
His dances and religious rituals weren't just for entertainment. They were a form of political messaging, an attempt to forge a connection between himself and the Roman people, to present himself as not just a ruler, but a divine figure capable of leading through spectacle. But as we've seen, his obsession with crafting this image ultimately undermined his ability to govern effectively.
In his pursuit of an identity that was larger than life, Elagabalus lost sight of the traditional elements of leadership that had held Rome together for centuries.
His decision to elevate the Eastern god Yelgabal and immerse himself in religious rituals alienated many of the Roman elite, and his dances, which were meant to captivate, became symbols of instability.
In the end, his image as a ruler who was different, bold, and creative was exactly what led to his downfall. His reign raises an important question about the role of spectacle in governance. Elagabalus believed that his artistic and spiritual performances could somehow replace the traditional Roman means of rule, but in doing so, he neglected the need for strong political and military alliances. Leadership isn't just about creating a persona, it's about maintaining the delicate balance between public image and real-world action. Elagabalus' failure to do so was ultimately his undoing, and it's a lesson that resonates in today's world, where image and performance are often seen essential to a leader's success. In his time, Elagabalus tried to do the impossible. He tried to transform the Roman Empire through spectacle, and in doing so, he forgot the very essence of what it meant to rule. As we reflect on his tragic end, it's also worth considering how his reign shaped the way later generations of rulers thought about power. While Elagabalus' reign was largely a failure, his story offers a stark reminder of the consequences of overindulgence and the dangers of alienating those who hold the real power within a system.
His downfall was a result of the delicate balance between image and authority tipping too far toward the former.
For all his creativity and vision, Elagabalus lacked the stability and foresight that a ruler needs to maintain power in a vast, complex empire.
Perhaps one of the most poignant lessons from Elagabalus' life is how fleeting power can be.
One moment, he was the emperor of Rome, the leader of an empire that spanned continents.
The next, he was assassinated by his own guards, cast aside by the very system that had once elevated him to the throne.
His story serves as a stark reminder that leadership is not permanent, that even the most eccentric,
Captivating rulers can fall from grace if they fail to meet the expectations placed upon them. But despite the chaos and scandal that marked his reign, Elagabalus remains an intriguing figure in Roman history. His story isn't just about failure, it's about the constant tension between the personal and the political, between self-expression and the realities of power.
Elagabalus may have been a ruler whose time came too early, but in his eccentricities and his boldness, he offered a glimpse into the future of leadership.
His approach may not have been sustainable in ancient Rome, but in today's world, where image and performance often go hand in hand with politics, it's clear that Elagabalus was more than just a ruler who loved to dance.
He was a symbol of the tension between tradition and innovation, between duty and individuality. As we conclude this journey through the life of Elagabalus, let us consider his story as a cautionary tale. It's easy to see his reign as a bizarre curiosity in the long sweep of Roman history, but there's more to it than that. Elagabalus' obsession with self-expression, his attempt to reshape the identity of the emperor, and his ultimate failure to maintain the empire's stability offer us a rich, complex narrative.
It's a reminder that leadership requires more than just vision. It requires the ability to balance personal ambition with the needs of those you govern.
Elagabalus may have been ahead of his time, but in the end, his inability to bridge the gap between his artistic vision and the practical demands of rule led to his tragic end.
His story continues to captivate us, not because he was a great emperor, but because he was a symbol of what can happen when ambition, creativity, and the desire for change go unchecked.
In the end, Elagabalus' reign is a story not just about the rise and fall of an emperor, but about the delicate balance between performance and power, tradition and innovation, that defines the very essence of leadership.
As we near the end of Elagabalus' story, it's crucial to focus on one of the most significant aspects of his reign, the lasting impact he left on the idea of imperial power and what it means to lead. Although his reign was brief, marked by eccentricity and scandal, the way he sought to wield power through performance and spectacle speaks to a deeper, almost philosophical tension between personal identity and political authority. In fact, Elagabalus' life is a rare glimpse into an emperor who attempted to redefine leadership, not through military might or political maneuvering, but through art, religion, and cultural expression.
At the heart of Elagabalus' reign was his fascination with performance. The idea that an emperor could shape his identity not just through traditional displays of power, but by creating a grand spectacle. Whether through his dances, his embrace of foreign religions, or his public rituals, Elagabalus sought to communicate something greater than his role as emperor. He wanted to be a living symbol, an embodiment of divinity and power. His performances weren't just acts of personal expression, they were political tools, ways to captivate and control the attention of the masses. In this sense, Elagabalus was ahead of his time. While most emperors of his era focused on military campaigns and consolidating political alliances, Elagabalus recognized the potential of image and identity. In an era where Roman leaders were often defined by their military achievements or their ability to maintain power through fear and discipline, Elagabalus' attempts to fuse leadership with theatricality seemed like an ambitious experiment. His reign, though chaotic and ultimately doomed, is a reminder that power doesn't always have to be exercised through force. It can also be exercised through influence, through the creation of an image, and through the ability to captivate a people. But of course, the limits of such an approach became painfully clear. Elagabalus may have been a performer, but he was also a ruler, and the responsibilities that came with being the leader of one of the largest and most powerful empires in history were not ones that could be ignored. His failure was not just in his artistic pursuits, but in his inability to maintain the traditional systems of Roman leadership that had allowed previous emperors to thrive.
While he dazzled with his performances, he neglected the core duties of a ruler, namely military strategy, political alliances, and maintaining the stability of the empire.
And when the political and military elites of Rome began to lose faith in him, his reign unraveled.
In many ways, Elagabalus' downfall was not just about his eccentricity, but about his refusal to play by the rules of Roman leadership.
It wasn't enough for him to just entertain, to create an image of himself as a divine ruler.
To rule effectively, an emperor had to earn the respect of the Senate, the military, and the people. Elagabalus, for all his creativity and boldness, simply couldn't balance the two.
He couldn't merge his personal, artistic ambitions with the practical realities of running an empire, and in the end, his reign serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of losing touch with the very institutions that give power meaning.
Yet, even in his failure, Elagabalus' story offers valuable lessons for us today. His life challenges us to think about the nature of leadership in a world where image and performance often take precedence over substance.
In our modern era, political figures and leaders are often defined by their public personas, how they present themselves to the world through social media, public speeches, and staged events.
We live in a world where image and performance can shape opinions, inspire loyalty, and create a sense of identity.
Elagabalus, in his time, was experimenting with exactly that. He understood that power could be molded through art and spectacle. Unfortunately, he couldn't understand that there was more to leadership than creating a captivating show. The story of Elagabalus raises important questions about the balance between personal expression and public duty. Can a ruler truly change the course of history through performance, or is it a fleeting spectacle, doomed to fade away once the show ends? Elagabalus' reign may have been brief, but it offers an insight for commentary on the way we view leadership, identity, and the sometimes precarious relationship between the two. His failure didn't lie in his ambition or his vision, it lay in his inability to understand that true power comes not just from the image you project, but from the substance behind it.
As you reflect on Elagabalus' life, you might begin to appreciate the complexity of his reign.
He was more than just a foolish emperor who liked to dance. He was a man who dared to dream of a new way to lead, a way that combined performance, spirituality, and politics.
His vision of leadership, though flawed, was a glimpse into a world where image and authority were intertwined, where art could be a form of political power.
In another time, perhaps his ideas would have been more widely accepted.
But in ancient Rome, where power was synonymous with military might and political stability, Elagabalus was an emperor who simply couldn't keep up. His tragic end was inevitable, but his story remains a fascinating one, a story about ambition, creativity, and the dangers of pushing too far beyond the boundaries of tradition.
Elagabalus may have failed as an emperor, but his legacy is one that continues to intrigue historians and remind us of the complexity of leadership. His reign offers us a window into the struggle between personal vision and political reality, a struggle that continues to play out in the world today. Perhaps, in the end, that's the true lesson of Elagabalus' life. Leadership isn't just about power. It's about understanding the delicate balance between image and substance, between the performance you create and the world you must lead.
As we draw closer to the end of our journey through the life and reign of Elagabalus, it's worth taking a moment to step back and reflect on the broader implications of his story.
His reign may have been short, marked by controversy, scandal, and eventual tragedy, but it stands as a vivid example of how the quest for personal expression can intersect with the harsh realities of political leadership. Elagabalus may have been an emperor who loved to dance, but in doing so, he also danced with the very forces that would eventually lead to his downfall. The emperor's story is one of ambition, miscalculation, and artistic vision.
His desire to reshape the very identity of the emperor, to transform himself from a ruler into a living symbol of divine power, is both admirable and misguided.
In his quest for self-expression, Elagabalus sought to break free from the conventional molds of leadership that had defined Roman emperors for centuries. But the failure to recognize the core duties of a ruler's stability, military strength, political alliances ultimately proved to be his undoing. What makes Elagabalus' reign so fascinating is that, for all its excesses, it was an attempt to redefine leadership. He wanted to transcend the traditional roles of a Roman emperor by incorporating elements of art, spirituality, and performance. He didn't just want to rule, he wanted to make an impression, to be remembered for something beyond military conquest and political maneuvering. And in this way, he was perhaps more forward-thinking than many of his predecessors.
In a world that now often values image over substance, Elagabalus' experiment in self-styling as a divine and artistic ruler feels strangely modern. But for all his attempts to project a divine image, Elagabalus couldn't escape the realities of the world around him. The empire he ruled was built on military might, and no amount of dance or religious ritual could replace the military strength and political maneuvering required to maintain control.
In a way, Elagabalus was a product of his time, an emperor who ruled at a time when Rome was facing immense challenges, both internally and externally. His reign was a brief and turbulent one, but it offers an important lesson. Leadership cannot be sustained by spectacle alone. It must be grounded in practical, real-world action. In the end, Elagabalus' downfall came not because of his inability to entertain, but because he failed to balance the personal with the political. His reign is a striking reminder of the fragility of power and the dangers of overindulgence.
He tried to play the role of the divine ruler, the living symbol of the gods, but in doing so, he alienated those who could have helped him maintain his grip on power.
He took his eccentricities too far, and in the end, his reign collapsed under the weight of his own excesses.
Perhaps the most poignant aspect of Elagabalus' reign is the sense of missed potential. For all his faults, there is a part of his story that feels ahead of its time. He sought to break free of the traditional constraints of leadership, to define himself in a way that no emperor before him had done.
In this way, Elagabalus is a tragic figure, a ruler who tried to create a new kind of power, only to find that the world around him wasn't ready for such a radical shift.
His artistic ambitions may have been noble, but they were ultimately incompatible with the responsibilities of ruling the Roman Empire. As we look back on the life of Elagabalus, it's important to remember that his reign, though brief, left a lasting impact on the way we think about leadership.
He was a ruler who understood the power of image, performance, and spectacle, a ruler who sought to be remembered for something more than just his conquests.
His reign might have ended in tragedy, but his story endures, offering a window into the complex and often contradictory nature of power.
Elagabalus' attempt to redefine what it meant to be emperor speaks to something universal in leadership, the tension between self-expression and responsibility.
His life reminds us that, while it's important for leaders to carve out their own identity, they must also remain grounded in the reality of the systems that sustain their power.
A ruler who prioritizes personal vision over the needs of the empire risks falling into the same traps that ensnared Elagabalus.
His death was brutal and swift, yet it marked the end of a reign that had never quite found its footing. It's a tragic irony that Elagabalus, in his quest to transcend the traditional image of the Roman emperor, became a symbol of the very thing he sought to avoid: the instability that comes with neglecting the political and military duties of leadership.
His death, ordered by the very men who were meant to protect him, is a grim reminder that the line between ruler and subject can be fragile.
But even in death, Elagabalus' legacy endures.
His story serves as a reminder of the complex relationship between image and power, between the personal and the political.
Though his reign was brief, his impact was profound, and his life offers us valuable insights into the nature of leadership, self-expression, and the challenges that come with both.
As we wrap up this exploration of Elagabalus' reign, it's worth remembering that his story isn't just a cautionary tale.
It's also a story of ambition, creativity, and the eternal struggle between individuality and responsibility.
Elagabalus may not have been the emperor Rome needed, but in his failure, he became a figure that continues to spark debate, intrigue, and reflection.
His legacy reminds us that leadership is about more than just power. It's about the ability to balance personal vision with the realities of governance, and to understand that sometimes the greatest spectacle is not the one you create for others, but the one you live in the world around you. As we come to the final chapter of Elagabalus' fascinating, albeit tragic, reign, it's impossible not to appreciate the strange depth of his story.
The emperor's life was a blend of ambition, artistic expression, and political miscalculation, a complex mix of boldness and folly.
His obsession with self-presentation, his relentless push to transform Roman leadership through dance, religion, and spectacle, ultimately served as both the symbol of the times and a cautionary tale.
His reign, while short, offers us a glimpse into the delicate balance required for effective rule. By now, it's clear that Elagabalus' reign wasn't just an eccentric moment in Roman history. It was an example of the extraordinary risks one takes when leadership becomes divorced from the responsibilities that maintain order. It was also an extraordinary attempt to redefine what it meant to be an emperor, not just a figure of military might and political maneuvering, but an artist, a performer, and a divine figure. Elagabalus wanted to be remembered for more than his political conquests. He wanted to be seen as an emperor who was both a symbol of power and a cultural leader, transcending the rigid expectations of his predecessors. In the world of politics today, we still see echoes of this struggle. Leaders, whether politicians, CEOs, or public figures, often strive to craft a persona, to project an image that goes beyond the day-to-day functions of leadership. Today, it's not enough to be competent and pragmatic.
In the age of social media and entertainment-driven culture, public figures are expected to be charismatic, relatable, and captivating. In many ways, Elagabalus was ahead of his time. His desire to integrate his personal image with his role as emperor parallels the modern emphasis on the performance of leadership. Yet, just as Elagabalus' obsession with image ultimately led to his downfall, it serves as a reminder of the dangers of placing too much focus on public spectacle.
The history of Elagabalus offers a valuable lesson in the limits of performance. While image can enhance a leader's power, it can also obscure the more mundane but equally important responsibilities of governance. Leaders today, like Elagabalus, must remember that while their image can inspire, it can also alienate those who expect responsibility, accountability, and a keen sense of duty. As we wind down this exploration of Elagabalus' life, let's consider how his reign fits into the broader narrative of Roman history. In the grand tapestry of the Roman Empire, Elagabalus was an anomaly, a ruler who tried to transcend the traditional expectations of power. His reign, chaotic and brief as it was, speaks to the complexities of leadership in any era. The emperor's downfall was not simply the result of his eccentricities, but also the result of his failure to recognize that leadership is a dynamic balance between personal vision and public duty. A ruler disconnected from the needs of the people, military, and political system is bound to fall. No amount of spectacle can replace the quiet work of governance. As Elagabalus' reign crumbled under the weight of his own excesses, the Roman Empire continued to evolve. The lessons of his failure about the limits of spectacle, political acumen, and self-indulgence were not lost on future rulers.
His story, tragic as it is, serves as both a warning and an inspiration, a warning about the dangers of excess, and an inspiration about the possibilities of breaking free from tradition to redefine leadership in ways that resonate with the people. Now, as the emperor's tale comes to an end, we can appreciate that Elagabalus, for all his flaws, was a figure who dared to dream beyond the confines of Roman tradition.
He may not have succeeded in reshaping the empire in the way he envisioned, but his story has endured.
It remains a testament to the enduring fascination with power, performance, and the delicate balance between personal expression and political responsibility. While his reign ended in assassination, his legacy has survived in the minds of those who studied the past and in the stories passed down through the ages.
In the end, we are left with a story of an emperor who sought to be remembered not for military victories or political stability, but for the way he redefined the very idea of what it means to lead. His reign reminds us that leadership is about more than just wielding power. It's about the responsibility to those you govern and the ability to recognize when your personal ambitions no longer align with the needs of the state. Elagabalus' story, though tragic, continues to speak to us across the centuries, urging us to consider the complexities of leadership, the role of self-expression, and the ways in which we define true power.
Now, as you close your eyes and drift off into the quiet night, perhaps Elagabala's story will linger in your thoughts, a reminder that, even in the most eccentric and failed reigns, there are lessons to be learned.
In the grand theatre of history, it's not just the emperors who conquer lands or build empires who leave a legacy, it's also those who, in their attempts to break free from tradition, leave us wondering, what if they had succeeded? What if their vision had found its place in the world?